If you aren't familiar with who I am, my name is Ashley. I hold a bachelor's degree in soil science. I have to say, as a soil scientist, I will be the very first person to admit that microbes are responsible for everything. Nutrients, nutrient cycling, their lack of availability, and how much is actually mobilized and moved into the plant. You name it, microbes are incredibly vital. Microbes feed primarily on one thing, carbon. Consequently, logically, people assume that if they just add sugar or add this or add that, it will increase those microbes within their soil. In today's video, we are actually going to examine the science behind what you can add to your soil and whether or not it is going to cause a benefit or affect you in any way, shape, or form. Of course, all of this is going to be based strictly in science. Here is the thing. This whole idea of adding carbon to get more microbes is not an unreasonable question. The issue is that good soils, healthy soils, aren't simply built via small spurts of microbial frenzies caused by an introduction of new material. It is caused by long-term additions and the consistent upkeep of those additions and so forth. Some of these hacks may actually fall into the category of something that is completely sustainable for you yourself to do, but just keep that context in the back of your head when you are analyzing what you should or should not go with. Let's start with number one, and that is unsulfured molasses. Now, molasses is probably one of the most scientifically sound additions that you can put into your garden. The reason being is that we oftentimes can use unsulfured molasses in our compost, for example. If you have ever added it to your compost, you have experienced this. It immediately starts quickening what is happening, and you very quickly realize, wow, this is accelerating my compost immensely. Compost accelerators oftentimes have molasses in them for this very reason. But the fact of the matter here is that if you continually add molasses beyond what is possible, you end up with an oxygen deprivation. Oxygen deprivation results in a really stinky compost. That is why too much can be added to a compost at times. Soil falls into the same grouping. This is even more true in the sense that you don't necessarily have as much organic material in your soil as you do in your compost. This, in turn, results in something like feeding an entire classroom of children straight sugar and then watching it completely explode. You are going to have a big amplification of energy and then an actual die-off entirely in a flat line in and of itself. We see the same thing with microbes and molasses in soil along with in compost. Next up is actually white sugar. It is a heck of a lot cheaper than molasses, and it does cause that kind of microbe explosion and activity. Now here is the issue. If we are using this to truly build up a microbe population long-term, it falls a little bit short. The reason being is that microbes don't just need carbohydrates. They need nitrogen, phosphorus, and all of these other nutrients that come along with their entire life process. So what we tend to see is if we add sugar in the absence of excess levels of nitrogen, phosphorus, and so forth, we have a struggling population that starts to pull nitrogen from what would be plant-available nitrogen into those microbes over time. It goes into the microbes, not the plant, which in turn causes a nitrogen deficiency. This is something similar to what we would see if we were to add a whole bunch of uncomposted material onto it. Now, there is a lot of talk around sugar and adding sugar to your tomatoes to help with Brix value. I have researched a little bit of that, and I don't know. I experimented one year and it did work. But the more I research, the more I question it or look into it. That is a completely separate conversation when we are talking about plant health and just giving a plant a boost. It is a totally different dynamic we are speaking to rather than microbes. Microbes need a continual source, and white sugar in particular doesn't allow for that. The next one is actually baking yeast. Yes, baking yeast quite literally. If you did not know, yeast is actually one of those endangered species when it comes to microorganisms within the soil. All soil has yeast, and we are seeing that yeast diversity and populations are decreasing over time when it comes to our soil. So the addition of yeast logically makes sense, and you can add yeast to your soil. What tends to happen is your microbes will feed on it, utilize it, and use that to build off of themselves. It is a complex system rather than just white sugar, and therefore it can, in some cases, not cause that massive spike with a decrease, but rather cause something that is a little bit more sustainable and happens over time. The only downfall to this is that the yeast you have access to is not soil yeast. More specifically, it is not something that is able to necessarily replicate and establish within your soil. So, while you can inoculate your soil with yeast, it does not mean that that yeast is going to continue to thrive, survive, and multiply within your soil. Now, if it comes to biodiversity, increasing microbe food and all that sort of thing, absolutely add it. You can add it to your compost, especially if it is expired, and you are going to throw it out anyway. Throw it in the garden. It is a great place for it to go. The reality is, though, that no one has really taken the time to isolate soil versions of this, similar to what we have done with mycorrhizal fungi or rhizobium bacteria. Therefore, there is nothing on the market that caters to that, and you just have to use your baking yeast, which again is not the same, but can have very similar effects. Loosely speaking, yes, yeast is beneficial, though not hugely beneficial, but also not harmful in the sense that white sugar or excessive molasses use would be. This next one I actually never heard of until I did research for this video, and that is oatmeal. Apparently, people are adding oatmeal to their garden. Here's the crazy part. It makes sense. It has proteins, it has lots of different sugars in it, and it has a huge wide range of nutrients in it because it is a plant. These are the similar nutrients that plants would use. You get the idea. It is tiny, it has a big surface area, and it is very easily incorporated into your soil. Again, you get the idea. Therefore, it actually does work. It is not decomposed in the sense that a compost would be, but it is very easily decomposed just due to how thin and small those little tiny oatmeal pieces are. So if you have a sandy soil or a soil that is very devoid of microbe intensity, absolutely, oatmeal is a great addition. The only downside is that it is expensive if you are doing a lot of land. But if you want to experiment to see if it makes a difference in your garden with microbe populations, oatmeal, out of all of them, would probably be a great one to choose from. The next one, oddly enough, is beer. Now, beer ends up in your garden for various different reasons. If you are a garden scientist, then maybe it ends up there on purpose because you are experimenting. If you are just a gardener that enjoys the odd brew and ends up bending over to check something out and ends up with some beer in your garden. Nonetheless, it still ends up in your garden. The fact of the matter is that it is beneficial. It contains nutrients, it contains yeast, it contains sugars, it contains it all. Now, when you add it, it does cause a temporary decrease in microbe populations solely due to the nature of alcohol in and of itself. This temporary decrease is eventually invaded again by microbes, and then the cycle continues onward. So does it increase microbe activity? Yes, it actually does temporarily. It adds probably the most amount of stuff, yeast, sugars, carbohydrates, and nutrients, compared to all the other ones we have spoken about. The reality is that it is expensive. Hypothetically and theoretically, it should cause a boost in microbe activity, but I probably wouldn't do my whole garden in it, and I probably would avoid my plant roots because the nature of alcohol is probably going to cause some issues with those as well, not just the microbes. The next one I have actually heard several people talk about is soda. I had someone send me a video of someone feeding their tomato plant Monster Energy drink on a regular basis. There are people who use Coca-Cola. You guys get the idea. The reality here is that there is a lot of sugar in these products, and therefore the sugar is used by the microbes, and you get the same response as you would with molasses and sugar. So, is it beneficial? Yes, it can cause some benefits, but all the other portions of it are not necessarily a good thing. Not to mention it is sticky, it is going to attract wasps, and it is expensive. It is not a cheap way to go about it. The reality here when it comes to increasing microbes is that there are some factors you need to contend with. Number one is you need to make sure there is organic material present. This can come in the form of manures, compost, and that sort of thing, combined with a top mulch and moisture. If you have those three factors, you are off to the races. You combine that with a little bit of heat, and you are really off to the races for some good results. You increase things like biodiversity through planting, not just one type of plant, but various different types of plants in their area. This includes things like amaranth, kohlrabi, herbs, chickweed, bachelor buttons, cabbage, celery, and Brussels sprouts. This biodiversity results in a bunch of different exudates being released. This plethora of exudates means a plethora of different microbes being called in, and therefore you have a biodiversity of microbes. You get the benefits of the nutrient cycling and the predatory aspects of it against the bad guys. Those are the keys when it actually comes to truly increasing your microbes. However, all of those methods I listed will temporarily increase them. Just the same way glyphosate technically does increase microbe activity in your soil. That is just the reality. If this breakdown of soil science has changed the way you look at the common items in your pantry, please subscribe and like the channel. We are digging deep into the science and history that others might try to keep buried. Let's cultivate a better future together. The next treasure trove of knowledge will be open soon.